All right, I'm Specialist Austin Hunt, stationed here at Fort Stewart with 6-8 Cav. My job is a 15 Whiskey UAS operator, AUSTIN HUNT. UAS is so important on the battlefield because it provides the commander and other leadership back at the TOC to see out past the line. A lot of times you lose that kind of communication and oversight over the battlefield, so that's where UAS comes into play to help build that broad picture of the battle space. UAS was something I hadn't really thought about before the Army, but I went to my local recruiter station. He gave me a list of jobs. It was either this or an aircraft mechanic. So I chose UAS because that seemed to be the way everything was going at the time. This job's got its ups and downs. Originally when I joined, I was supposed to be flying the RQ-28, but the Army since divested that platform. So we've kind of just gotten handed multiple different types, that's where that pro comes in. So now I'm not just qualified on one aircraft, I'm qualified on like 5 now. It would have to be how much you can learn. You always think you know enough, and then you end up finding out that there's more stuff within that gray area that you had no idea was there. This job to me means giving the commander early and accurate warning as far as if there's threats in the area, if our forces are able to move more quickly than what we anticipated, or if we have to slow down. So it kind of gives me a little bit of power, if you would say, on the battlefield. UAS has been kind of changing and shaping the battlefield since the start. Like I said before, we used to have the RQ-28, the Shadow platform. It was more of a mid-size UAS with long-range capabilities. We could fly out to 120 kilometers, and our main job was surveillance, so we would go out and do route reconnaissance, area reconnaissance, and zone reconnaissance, and just pull as much information to feed back to the TOC as possible, so we can, it leaves less gray space in that battlefield. Innovation isn't optional, it's survival.
I'm Specialist Daniel Lannan. I'm with 1st Battalion, 3rd Combat Aviation Brigade, attached to 2nd Brigade during this training density. And I am a 15 Whiskey, heading up the 3D printing design and innovations for use for gunnery tables for UAS training. "3D printing gives us accessibility to running our prototypes without having to go through a third-party manufacturing system. Essentially what it does is if we have an idea that can improve our proficiency with a UAS platform, we can run a design, we can have it printed probably by the end of the day, if not sooner, and we can be running that prototype next day. What we print here is the 3D printed ordnance for the gunnery tables for testing proficiency with future live munitions. It gives us greater accessibility to it. Instead of having to go through a third party to gather materials, we can make it in-house and continue to run tests, and we can continue to train without having to wait. Some issues that we have would be failure to print is probably the most common thing, but that just continues with experience, running different prototypes or filament settings, regardless of what we're printing, at some point we're going to see a failure, whether it's by machine or by human error, and we learn from those experiences and we move on. So from the original design type, we can see basic non-aerodynamic appeal. It wouldn't drop correctly, it would fly off course, and so slowly through each iteration we would add more canards to give it specific stability and rotational force to improve accuracy for any droppable ordnance that we would have. In addition to that, structural integrity itself is still a common issue. Today we dropped our Type 9s, only to find that they fracture at the center point, and so now for Type 10, we're going to add additional skeletal structures to give it that internal structure that it requires in order to be more proficient for continued testing. The end product that we're shooting for our 3D printed ordnance is a set standard for the gunnery tables to use across the board. So it takes the error out of the ordnance and places it on the operator so that they can solely focus on improving their efficiency instead of having to worry about the gimmicks of what they're dropping, to hopefully improve the Army as a whole. It's important when it comes to the battlefield as far as accuracy goes and knowing what you're training with, because you're going to train how you fight and you're going to fight how you train. So if you go out there with substandard ordnance or something you're unfamiliar with, you're not going to understand the characteristics of, the projectile's flight. So it takes the guesswork out of it. You don't have to worry about it flying off course because the center of gravity is off by a couple of millimeters. If you know your ordnance that you're dropping, you're going to know where it goes. So having that set standard is going to improve lethality as far as UAS goes. I would say understanding what we have to work with, i.e. 3D printers, and just our whatever tool sets we have on hand can improve in every aspect. From, like I said before, is like improving the ordnance to improve accuracy. Seems like a small thing, but it's a huge step. If you know where it's going, you're going to know where it goes. Versus coming in blind, not knowing anything about 3D printers. These could just sit on a table all day long and never get used, and in reality you're just sleeping on one of your greatest assets as far as innovation goes. Like I said, on-demand prototyping. If someone has an idea, and it doesn't just have to be me, it could be anyone from private up, they can say, I have an idea, I just need to see if it works. 3D printers give you the access to create immediate prototypes and on-demand ideas to see if it functions, and if it does, it can improve. I know the on-packs ATAC carriers were a huge innovation that came out of the 82nd, and now they're used Army-wide.